A $1 million paycheck earned for lobbying the White House. Chinese tech giant Huawei shelled out the cash over 6 months to a single lobbyist. The Australian Open retracts a ban on T-shirts supporting star athlete Peng Shuai. That's after major backlash from the tennis community and Australian politicians. An award-winning film is moving audience members across the country. It's based on a true story, how an American reporter and a group of Chinese students work to expose Beijing's propaganda. A Beijing court sentences a Falun Gong practitioner to 8 years in prison, but the timing of her punishment is being called into question just weeks ahead of the Winter Olympics. And Beijing's defense ministry says China and Russia are working together to boost military capabilities. The two countries' navies recently held joint military drills. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Before we start, as you may already know, YouTube has demonetized our channel and also stopped recommending us to potential viewers. If you like our channel, please share us with your family and friends to help more people learn about what's really happening in and around China. Now we turn to today's daily news. A lobbyist for Chinese tech giant Huawei reportedly took home a significant paycheck over the past half year, totaling $1 million. Federal disclosures reveal Tony Podesta took home the payment for his work in lobbying the White House. The company paid Podesta $500,000 in just the fourth quarter last year. According to a disclosure form, the lobbying targeted the executive office of the president and centered around telecommunication services and impacted trade issues. Huawei was put under U.S. trade sanctions under the Trump administration. A disclosure form filed last week shows Podesta was compensated $1 million in total over a 6-month period for his work. Huawei has faced international scrutiny in recent years. The U.S. has flagged the company as a national security threat, referring to its close ties with the Chinese Communist regime. That's on top of its role as a suspected espionage tool for Beijing. A stream of U.S. sanctions since 2019 have barred Huawei from using U.S. technology and have blocked its equipment from being used in critical U.S. infrastructure. All in all, the penalties have slashed the company's annual revenue by 1/3. What's more, the Biden administration further tightened those measures at the end of last year, restricting Huawei from receiving new equipment licenses from U.S. regulators. To help recover from those impacts, Huawei seems to have ramped up its U.S. influence operations. According to disclosure filings, Podesta is one of a half-dozen lobbyists the company hired since July 2021. Filings show Huawei spent over $3.5 million on U.S. lobbying efforts last year, nearly 8 times as much as the year before. The Australian Open is walking back its ban on T-shirts that show support for Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai. The reversal follows backlash from politicians and athletes. Last Friday, a group of fans arrived at a match wearing matching T-shirts, all bearing the words, "Where is Peng Shuai?" They later held up a banner with the same phrase. Peng Shuai disappeared from public view for months after accusing a top Chinese Communist Party official of sexual assault on social media. Authorities soon approached the group of tennis fans, confiscating the banner and instructing them to change out of the T-shirts. They explained the Australian Open's organizers don't allow political slogans at the tournament.
The Australian Open does have a rule that there can't be any political slogans. And I'm not saying you can't have those views, but I am saying that Tennis Australia sets the rules here.
But the decision was met with swift backlash. Tennis legend Martina Navratilova called the decision to silence the fans pathetic.
I find it really, really cowardly. This is not a political statement. This is a human rights statement.
Former world #1 in tennis doubles Nicholas Mahut wrote on Twitter that the move shows a lack of courage. Australia's defense minister also chimed in.
I think it's deeply concerning, and I think we should be speaking up about these issues.
On Tuesday, organizer for the Australian Open, Tennis Australia reversed the ban. Its chief executive, Craig Tilley, told the Associated Press that it is okay for people to wear the Peng Shuai shirts, as long as they don't gather in large groups or cause problems. Worth noting, one of the Australian Open's main sponsors is a Chinese liquor company. Organizers said the 2018 deal was the largest agreement with a Chinese company in the history of the tournament, valued at around $100 million. The 2022 Winter Olympics are slated to begin next week in Beijing, but calls to boycott the event are still running high. At a recent press conference, Florida Senator Rick Scott publicly condemned the Chinese Communist Party's human rights abuses.
It is a fact that the Communist Chinese Party is committing horrific human rights abuses against Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and Uyghur Muslims. It is a fact that the Communist Chinese Party is committing genocide and desecrating the Uyghur homeland.
Ahead of the Beijing Winter Olympics, Senator Rick Scott issued a sharp reprimand over the Chinese Communist Party's human rights violations. He called the regime's treatment of its own athletes alarming, citing former Grand Slam tennis doubles champion Peng Shuai. She dropped out of sight in late 2021 after publicly accusing a top Chinese Communist Party official of sexual assault.
I can't tell you how worried I am about the athletes competing in Beijing. Look at what Communist China did to silence and disappear Peng Shuai. It's terrifying. I've called on the IOC and the Biden administration to take every step necessary to keep Americans safe. But unfortunately, I haven't heard a word from them on what they're doing about it.
Out of concern for Peng's safety, the Women's Tennis Association suspended its activities in China, while a number of athletes around the world have expressed support for her. Since then, growing opposition to Beijing's hosting of the Olympics has been on the rise, led by human rights advocates and U.S. lawmakers.
The CCP's authoritarian behavior and repressive policies against Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, and Tibetans cannot be normalized. Any form of participation in the upcoming 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics is equivalent to endorsing its escalating atrocities. And any form of appeasement policy is no different than allowing China to continue its oppression, and even inviting it to our backyards.
The White House last month has officially announced a diplomatic boycott of the upcoming Winter Games. Beijing vowed to meet the move with firm countermeasures.
At the press conference, Boston Celtics center Enes Kanter Freedom said the Chinese Communist Party is no friend to other countries.
And, the world needs to wake up and realize that the Chinese Communist Party is not our friend.
The U.S. has staged a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics, citing the Chinese regime's ongoing genocide against the Uyghur Muslims in China's western Xinjiang region. But now reports are indicating a different persecution is ramping up more in the interior of China. Anders Kaur, the publisher of the Journal of Political Risk and a human rights advocate, tells us more about the Chinese Communist Party's oppression of the Falun Gong spiritual group.
Well, Dr. Miles Yu, who is a former State Department official, he worked for Pompeo directly on China's strategy under the Trump administration, has argued that there's actually more evidence for genocide of the Falun Gong people than of the Uyghur people. So we really should be thinking about not only a Uyghur genocide, but certainly a Falun Gong genocide, and potentially even a triple genocide of the Tibetans. So this is truly a genocide games that's happening in Beijing right now, or coming up, and we need to be really concerned about it.
So what's the solution to this abuse of these religious minorities? I mean, when we look at it, China's on the other side of the world. What can the average American do to make a difference?
Well, the average American, boycotts are one thing of Chinese goods. Another thing is to bring that boycott to a higher level in terms of economic sanctions on China, tariffs on Chinese goods. The tariffs shouldn't just be limited to the United States. We should extend those tariffs. The Europeans should extend those tariffs to their own countries, Japanese, South Koreans, basically all countries that believe and value freedom, liberty, democracy, need to start closing down the Chinese economy until they change their approach to human rights, improve their human rights.
So with the Falun Gong persecution, we've seen independent tribunals, books by David Kilgore, that show even just the brutal harvest, forcibly extracting these organs from these political dissidents and these religious minorities. Is this something that we've ever seen before in history?
I don't think so. I think it is unique to the CCP persecution of the Falun Gong and of other minorities. But it's primarily the Falun Gong who are getting this, in part because they're some of the healthiest people in China in terms of that, they reject drinking, they reject smoking, and for this reason their organs tend to be healthier than other organs, and and unfortunately that's made them a target of Chinese Communist Party medical professionals, quote unquote.
An award-winning movie is bringing audiences to tears across the country. It captures the story of a jaded American reporter and a team of innocent students as they risk everything to expose the Chinese Communist Party's deadly propaganda. NTD's Juliet Song has more on the big screen release.
More than 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners protested peacefully in Beijing, China.
The movie is based on true events. It follows the story of Wang, a student at a top university in China. Wang practices Falun Gong, a spiritual meditation discipline that teaches the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. But overnight, Wang finds himself an enemy of the state. That's after Beijing launched a national suppression campaign against the practice. As Beijing ramps up the persecution campaign and turns out propaganda to defame Falun Gong practitioners, Wang meets Daniel, an American reporter struggling to find meaning in his profession. Together, they're faced with a choice: to tell the truth, risking their careers or even lives, or stay silent.
The government is conducting one of the largest scale propaganda campaigns in history. You just want to ignore it.
What are you going to do? Walk into the prison and demand to see him?
Without China, expose their lies to the world.
In Delaware, State Senator Dave Lawson gave his take on the film.
Shocked, amazed, certainly felt that I was way behind in what was going on when this started in 1999, and now 23 years later, this is now just coming out. I'm embarrassed I didn't know more.
In Los Angeles, one moviegoer says she had to hold back tears.
All these people that are being persecuted and are victims in China and anywhere else under a totalitarian regime, we just want to let them know that we are going to be praying for them.
Another audience member says even though the movie made him sad about rights abuses happening in China,
I think it was also the mission of the film is to make you feel somewhat hopeful that there is redemption, that at the end of the day there is some hope if we fight for what's right.
He says he hopes more people can build their courage and stand up for what's right.
I really hope that they find it in themselves, like that character who's willing to sacrifice his family, his child, his wife, in order to stand up for what's right. That's a very difficult choice to make. It's much more comfortable to stay where you are and to be silent and to continue to do what you do and just go along with the story. But to find it in yourself, to stand up and do what's right, we all have to do that.
Adding that if people are willing to speak out, they can make a change. The movie is premiering in 30 cities from the East to West Coast. That includes New York, Washington, D.C., and California. Juliet Song, NTD News.
As the 2022 Winter Olympics approaches, a court in Beijing has sentenced a Falun Gong practitioner to 8 years in prison. She is one of 11 Chinese citizens who were detained last year for providing information to foreign media during the virus's early outbreak in China.
One Beijing resident says her family is being torn apart for the second time in the span of just 15 years. Despite living as an upstanding citizen, she's now facing an 8-year prison sentence. She was assigned the punishment just weeks before the Winter Olympics kicks off in the city. Now, a human rights lawyer is drawing attention to the incident and condemning the game's host city, Beijing.
The International Olympic Committee should open its eyes to the current situation of human rights in China under the Chinese Communist Party and should not continue to cooperate with it.
Xu Na is a Falun Gong practitioner. The spiritual discipline is based on the core tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. But the Chinese regime deemed the practice's popularity a threat in 1999 and launched a nationwide persecution campaign to eradicate it. The persecution had already targeted Xu's family once before, as the world geared up for the 2008 Games. Beijing police arrested Xu and her husband 14 years ago in January 2008 in the name of so-called Olympic check. Following their arrest, Xu's husband died in custody.
Her husband was persecuted to death 14 years ago. 14 years later, she is imprisoned and sentenced to 8 years.
The same parallel appears to be repeating itself, this time ahead of the 2022 Winter Olympics. Early last week, she was sentenced to nearly a decade behind bars and a fine of over $3,000. Her crime? Sharing the truth about the pandemic situation inside China.
It's true that she was sentenced to 8 years. Others got 5 or 4, but her sentence this time is especially heavy-handed.
Xu Na is one of the 11 Chinese citizens who were detained last summer. They were punished for publishing pictures documenting the real situation amid China's COVID-19 outbreaks. All of them are Falun Gong practitioners.
Xu Na is not only innocent, but also meritorious.
Wu says Xu's story should be more than enough to raise international awareness. The 2022 Games make Beijing the first city to host both the Summer and Winter Olympics. That's despite international calls for a full boycott over the Chinese regime's human rights record, which some say should disqualify China as a host country.
Now for an update on a Chinese rights defender. This month's news broke that Guo Feixiong had been arrested in China. Authorities allege that he incited subversion of state power. The announcement came less than 2 days after his wife died from cancer in the U.S. Guo is a prominent human rights activist in China. He had spent over a decade in detention due to his human rights work in the country. Human Rights Watch says during that time, he was subjected to torture, including electric shocks. Guo's wife fled to the U.S. with their children in 2009 to escape persecution by the Chinese regime, as their tactics often include punishing family members. The couple had been apart for 15 years. Earlier last year, Guo's wife was diagnosed with cancer. In a letter addressed to Guo, she said the cancer cells had spread all over her body, and she needed him by her side as soon as possible. Guo requested permission to see his wife and children, but the Chinese authorities barred him from boarding a flight to the U.S. Earlier this month, Guo's wife passed away in Maryland. Last week, the U.S. State Department issued a statement expressing condolences for her death. The statement also called on the Chinese regime to release Guo, adding the PRC must stop punishing individuals for exercising their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Guo is currently being held at the Guangzhou No. 1 Detention Center. No word on when, if ever, he will be released. The social media account of a central Chinese hospital is banned after it pleaded for people's welfare first and praised the UK for ending most of its pandemic measures. Beijing saw the hospital's move as defying their zero-tolerance policy.
A Chinese social media post is getting a host of attention online. Here's what it says. What is superior and what is inferior? It's not decided by GDP or nuclear weapons or high-speed trains, but by the political system and social management and how well people's welfare is or how well people live. It's part of a post shared on Chinese messaging app Weibo last Thursday. The owner of the account is known only as Hospital Office of Henan Province, a state-run hospital. The post refers to the fact that the UK has announced the bulk of its pandemic measures will soon come to an end. The Chinese post quickly started trending. In a matter of hours, it racked up nearly 56 million views and over 3,000 comments. But it wasn't available for long. The post later disappeared from the platform and the hospital account was banned. The hospital issued an apology that evening, saying it would conduct an investigation into the post and noting that the person responsible had been suspended. China has been known for its strict pandemic measures, especially its zero COVID-19 policy. Under that goal, officials aim to completely eliminate the virus from inside China's borders, an idea nearly all countries have abandoned. Numerous reports indicate the country's harsh measures have made life difficult for many residents.
Authorities lifted a month-long lockdown in the city of Xi'an on Monday. It was one of the country's longest. But in other parts of China, including Beijing, the authorities are doubling down on their zero-tolerance policy. It's meant to stop the spread of the virus. But what does this policy mean for the people? In a viral video clip, a Xi'an resident tells her story. Under the zero-tolerance policy, when someone in a neighborhood tests positive for the virus, anyone who was there during a certain period of time must go into quarantine, including visitors. This woman was one such visitor.
It happened that one day when I went to take a shuttle in that neighborhood, I scanned the QR code there. Then a positive case was confirmed there. So now I'm required to go home to quarantine for 7 days. The authorities told me to go home as soon as possible, as people in my neighborhood are waiting for me, to put a seal on my door. They won't wait for me, as they are to finish their work.
She says she tried to take a taxi home, but soon the driver kicked her out. That's after noticing her health code, part of China's contact tracing system, listed her as high risk for infection. At that point, she was over 20 miles away from home and had a suitcase with her. Finding herself in a sticky situation, she reached out to community leaders for help.
Even in this situation, the neighborhood management kept telling me to figure a way out myself, that it's none of their business.
Next, she contacted emergency hotlines, but they, too, told her to turn to family or friends for help. 2 hours later, she was still stranded. She also noted that even when she did get home, food supplies would be a problem.
For food or other supplies, they don't care either, telling me so make it by myself. I told them there is no way to cook in my apartment, and I don't have any food or supplies. And since my health code turns red, I cannot go to any supermarket. I have to be quarantined for 7 days, and I'm not allowed to ask for food delivery. I asked, what if I die of starving? Then the local authorities still kept saying the same thing. Figure it out yourself. Figure it out yourself. Figure it out yourself.
There are currently no reports on what happened after that point. A new high-tech device is joining China's fleet of pandemic control protocols. An eyewitness video is making the rounds on social media. It captures a Chinese drone hovering nearby residential buildings while delivering an announcement. Over loudspeaker, it asks residents to prepare for mass COVID-19 testing. The clip was filmed in Tianjin Municipality, around 60 miles southeast of China's capital, Beijing. The area marks where China first detected the Omicron variant. In the video, the drone speaker explains that the community will remain under lockdown from 12 p.m. to 12 a.m. It also details how residents will be required to come out for virus testing and must abide by local instructions. The announcement then repeatedly urges residents to follow the rules, instructing them to take their ID and move only when it's their turn. Germany's Navy chief stepped down on Saturday after drawing criticism for his words about Russia, Ukraine, and China. Eddie Atkin has more.
Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz on Sunday urged Europe and the United States to think carefully when considering sanctions against Russia for any aggression against Ukraine. His comments came on the same day as Germany's Navy chief resigned, following comments on Russian President Putin. Vice Admiral Kai-Achim Schonbach said that what the Russian leader really seeks is to be treated as an equal by the West.
But what he really wants is respect. He wants, on eye level, he wants respect. And my God, giving someone respect is low cost, even no cost.
Schonbach made the remarks at a think tank in India on Friday. He also said the West needs Russia as an ally against China.
Having this big country, even if it's not a democracy at our side, as a bilateral partner, giving them a chance with the EU and also the United States of America, having on eye level, same eye level. It is easy, it's an easy workout. And it keeps us probably Russia away from China.
The comments come at a sensitive time as Russia has amassed tens of thousands of troops on Ukraine's borders. Ukraine's ambassador to Germany on Sunday welcomed the resignation of the Navy chief, but he wrote on Twitter, "This step is not sufficient to restore full trust in German politics. The German government has to change its course towards Kiev." Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
China and Russia have begun joint military exercises. A Tuesday statement from the Russian Defense Ministry said their drill was in the Arabian Sea. The Chinese Defense Ministry says the drills aim to enhance the capabilities of the two countries' militaries. 5 ships took part, including a Russian missile cruiser, a destroyer, and a tanker, while China sent a destroyer and a replenishment ship to participate. The Russian Defense Ministry said the Russian and Chinese warships practiced tactical maneuvering and inspection exercises. They also carried out a training mission simulating the rescue of a captured ship, which included evacuating personnel by helicopter from the Russian destroyer to the Chinese ship. The drill comes on the heels of a joint exercise between Iran, Russia, and China last week. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.